Raymond Earl Booker served in 4 wars: Vietnam at 19, Grenada at 26, the Gulf at 38, Iraq at 51, as a senior non-commissioned officer who volunteered when his unit was short. He came home from his last deployment in March of 2004 with a Purple Heart, a traumatic brain injury that had not yet been formally diagnosed, and a duffel bag. His wife of 22 years had filed for divorce while he was in Fallujah. His house had been sold. His name was no longer on the lease of anywhere. He slept in his truck for 61 days before the VA acknowledged his housing application. When Raymond walked onto the Family Feud stage in Nashville on September 14, 2023, he was 70 years old, standing straight as a rifle, wearing his one good suit and every one of his 4 service medals pinned to the lapel. He answered the first 3 survey questions correctly, brought the crowd to its feet, and then his granddaughter Imani, age 8, tugged the back of his jacket and whispered 4 words that the boom microphone caught in full. Steve Harvey heard them from 8 feet away. He looked at his cue card. He set it down on the podium. He pressed both fists to his mouth. And then Steve Harvey, the man who has hosted this show for 27 years without missing a single taping, walked off his own stage and did not come back for 14 minutes. It was a Thursday in Nashville, the 3rd taping of the week. The studio was warm, the audience loud, the way afternoon audiences get when the day is going well. The Booker family from Clarksville, Tennessee, Raymond, his daughter Charisse, age 44, his son-in-law Marcus, Imani, age 8, and Raymond's nephew Darnell, had driven 45 minutes in Charisse's minivan. Raymond had been in the front seat with his medals in a velvet pouch in his lap. He had put them on himself in the parking lot, standing outside the van with the door open, pinning each one straight while Imani watched and counted. She had counted them before. She knew there were 4. She had asked her grandfather once what the medals were for. He had told her, "For going." She had asked, "Going where?" He had said, "Far." She had thought about that answer for a long time. She told her mother later that year that she thought it meant he went farther than most people ever had to go. The competing family, the Pattersons from Knoxville, were 3 brothers and 2 sisters-in-law who spent the pre-show warm-up doing a choreographed handshake they had clearly rehearsed. The audience loved them. Raymond watched from across the stage and smiled. He had spent a lifetime being easy around strangers. 61 days in a truck will do that. Strip away everything except the basic human need to connect with whoever is in front of you. But nobody in that studio knew what those 4 medals had cost him to get back. Raymond Earl Booker enlisted at 18 years old in 1971, 3 months after graduating from Clarksville High School. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, earning his first commendation for pulling a wounded sergeant, a man named Calvin Pruitt, from Macon, Georgia, 200 yards through open ground under fire. Calvin Pruitt sent Raymond a Christmas card every year for the next 40 years. The last one arrived in December of 2019, written in a hand that shook. Raymond kept it in the velvet pouch with his medals. He came home from Vietnam in 1973 to no parade, no ceremony, and 3 men on his street who crossed to the other side when they saw his uniform. He did not talk about that. He found work, married a woman named Gloria, and spent 10 years building something ordinary and good. A house, 2 children, a routine. Then Grenada, then the Gulf. Each time he came back a little further from the man who had left. He did not talk about that either. The VA diagnosed his traumatic brain injury in 2006, 2 years after his final deployment. By then, the symptoms, the migraines that put him flat for 3 days at a stretch, the memory gaps that came and went like weather, The noise sensitivity that made grocery stores feel like combat had already cost him 2 jobs. He had worked as a school bus driver until a migraine hit behind the wheel, and he had to pull over and call Charisse to come get him and the 12 children on board. He did not drive a school bus after that. The VA assigned him a case manager. The case manager had a caseload of 340 veterans. Raymond's first appointment was scheduled 6 months out. He attended every one. And that wasn't even the part that broke people. The housing situation had started before his TBI diagnosis. Gloria had filed in 2003, while Raymond was in Fallujah. He had received the paperwork by military mail. He had read it 3 times and then folded it and put it in his breast pocket and gone back to work because there was nothing else to do with it at that moment. When he came home in March of 2004, the house was sold, the proceeds split by court order, and his half, $31,400, had already been partially claimed against legal fees. He received $18,200. He put it in a bank account and slept in his truck in the parking lot of a Kroger on Fort Campbell Boulevard because he did not want to spend the money until he knew where he was going to land. He ate once a day. He showered at a veterans center that opened at 6 a.m. He wore his civilian clothes and left his medals in the glove compartment. The VA housing voucher application was submitted in April 2004. It was flagged for review in June. It was partially processed in July and returned for additional documentation. Proof of military discharge, proof of income, proof of Tennessee residency despite the fact that he had no Tennessee address because he was sleeping in a truck. Raymond gathered every document. He resubmitted. The application was approved in August. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Clarksville on August 31, 2004, 61 days after he came home from his 4th war. He never told Charisse the full 61 days. He told her the apartment had taken a while to come through. She was 25 and had her own 2 children and a husband working nights, and Raymond did not want her carrying his weight on top of her own. He told Imani nothing, because Imani was not born yet. Imani was born in 2015. From the time she could form sentences, she followed her grandfather like a shadow. She sat on his lap while he watched the news. She brought him water without being asked when a migraine came. She learned the word migraine at age 4 and used it correctly. She told her teacher at school that her grandfather was a hero. Her teacher asked why. Imani said, "Because he keeps going even when it hurts." The audience thought they knew his story. They were wrong. What Raymond had not told anyone, not Charisse, not Darnell, not the VA case manager who had worked with him for 11 years, was that 6 months after he moved into the Clarksville apartment in 2004, on a night in February when a migraine had been running for 31 hours and the room would not stop moving, he had sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his 4 medals laid out on the nightstand and asked God, out loud, in a voice nobody could hear, whether any of it had been worth it. He had stayed in that question for a long time. Then he had picked up Calvin Pruitt's most recent Christmas card. It was 2004, so Calvin was still writing in a steady hand, and read it. Calvin had written, "You brought me home, Ray. I think about that every day." Raymond had put the card down and gone to sleep. He told Imani this story for the first time 2 weeks before the Family Feud taping. He did not know why he told her then and not before. She had listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she said, "Is that why you keep the card in the pouch with the medals?" He said yes. She said, "Good, that's where it belongs." What Imani whispered into the microphone was something she had planned to say privately, not to the entire studio. The Booker family was 43 points into the second round when Raymond gave an answer that brought the studio to its feet. He had named the top survey response for "something a soldier never forgets," without hesitating, and the board had flipped to reveal 47 points, the highest single answer of the day. The audience roared. Charisse grabbed Marcus's arm. Darnell pumped his fist. Raymond stood at his podium with his hands flat on the surface and his chin level and his 4 medals catching the studio lights. He did not smile the way contestants usually smile when the board flips. He looked at the number, 47, and his jaw moved once, the way a man's jaw moves when he is holding something in rather than letting it out. Imani, standing behind him in the family lineup, stepped forward and reached up and tugged the back of his jacket. She had to stretch to reach it. She was 8 years old and he was 6 feet 1. He bent down. She cupped her hands around his ear, she said, and the boom microphone 4 feet above them caught every word. "Grandpa, you did it. You finally did real good somewhere that wasn't a war." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey, 12 feet away, heard it. His head turned toward the microphone first, then toward Raymond. Raymond had straightened back up. He was standing completely still. His hands were still flat on the podium. His chin was still level. But his eyes had filled, and one of the medals on his lapel, the Purple Heart, pinned closest to his chest, was trembling. Because Raymond's chest was moving in the way that chests move when a person is trying not to make a sound. Steve looked at his cue card. He looked at Raymond. He set the cue card down. He pressed both fists to his mouth. He stood there for 6 seconds. Then he turned and walked off the stage. No explanation, no signal to producers. He simply walked into the wings, and the heavy curtain closed behind him, and the studio fell completely silent for the longest silence anyone in that room had ever experienced on a live production set. 14 minutes passed. No producer called cut. No floor director moved. The audience did not speak. The Booker family stood at their podium. The Pattersons stood at theirs. Imani held her grandfather's hand and looked at the curtain. Then Steve Harvey walked back out. He had been crying. He did not try to hide it. His eyes were red, and his voice, when he spoke, had the texture of something that had just been through something. He walked back to center stage. He did not pick up his cue card. He looked at Raymond Earl Booker and he said, "I need a minute." Raymond said, "Take your time." The audience laughed. Soft, broken, open laughter. The kind that comes after something has cracked a room apart and people need to breathe. Steve looked at the floor. Then he looked up. He said, "I have hosted this show for 27 years. I have stood on this stage through things that moved me, things that surprised me, things I didn't see coming. But I have never, not once, heard a child say something that true about someone they love." He looked at Imani. "You know who your grandfather is, don't you?" It was not a question. Imani nodded. Steve said, "How old are you?" She said, 8. He said, "You're going to be something, young lady. I already know it." Then he looked at Raymond. He said, "Sir, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, because this room can take it." Raymond nodded once. Steve said, "Was there a moment, somewhere in all of those years, when you didn't know if it was worth it?" Raymond looked at Steve for a long time. Then he said, "February 2004, one night, 6 months after I came home." Steve said, "What got you through it?" Raymond reached into the breast pocket of his one good suit. He took out a folded envelope, soft at the creases from years of handling, and held it up. He said, "A Christmas card from a man I carried home." He wrote, "You brought me home, Ray. I think about that every day." He put it back in his pocket. He said, "That was enough." The studio fell completely silent. Steve put his fist to his mouth again. He held it there. Then he lowered it and said, "Let me tell you something, Raymond." He stopped, started again. "I know what it is to have nothing to hold on to except one sentence from somebody who made it because of you. I was living in a 1976 Ford Tempo. 3 years, showering at gas stations, eating from trash cans. The only thing that kept me from giving up completely was a promise I made, that if God got me out of that car, I would spend every day showing up for people who were carrying what I was carrying." He looked at Raymond. "You carried 4 wars in your chest, and you still showed up in your one good suit with your medals on. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen on this stage. In 27 years. Raymond Earl Booker, 70 years old, 4 wars, Purple Heart, 61 nights in a parking lot, looked at Steve Harvey and said, "I just wanted Imani to see me do something good." Every person on that crew cried. Every one. The boom operator, the floor director, the segment producer who had not cried at work in 11 years. They cried, and they did not look away. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the production booth. "Get me a line." A phone was on the stage in 40 seconds. Steve called the director of the Veterans Crisis Line Partnership Program, a man he had worked with through his foundation since 2019, live on the studio speakers. He explained Raymond's situation: the TBI, the housing gap, the VA backlog, the 22 years of service across 4 conflicts. He said, "I want to know what we can do right now." The director said, "We'll assign a dedicated advocate by Monday. We'll review the full benefits file. We'll get him what he was owed." Steve said, "Today, not Monday." The director said, "Today." But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the camera, the main lens, the one that goes to 31 million homes, and he said, "To every veteran watching right now, you are not invisible to me. You came home to nothing, and you kept your spine straight, and you put your medals on, and you showed up. I see you. We see you. And we are not done showing up for you." He held the camera for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Now, let's finish this." The Booker family and the Pattersons were each awarded full prizes. The production company made a separate announcement that evening. All fast money winnings for the taping, $40,000 total, would be matched dollar for dollar by the show's executive producers and donated to veteran housing assistance in Raymond Booker's name. It was the first time in Family Feud history that an entire taping's prize pool had been externally matched and redirected. The clip, Imani's whisper, the studio silence, Steve walking off, Steve walking back, was posted at 11:58 p.m. the night of the taping. By 5 a.m., it had 7.7 million views. By the end of the week, it had 334 million. The hashtag "You Finally Did Good" reached 1.6 billion impressions in 11 days and trended in 29 countries. It became the most watched Family Feud moment involving a veteran in the show's history by a margin that the network's analytics team described as not statistically comparable to anything in their records. Steve Harvey appeared on CBS Sunday morning, 8 days after the taping. He was asked what happened in those 14 minutes off stage. He said, "I needed to remember why I do this. 14 minutes was how long it took." He paused. Raymond Booker fought 4 wars for this country and came home to a parking lot. If I can't cry about that for 14 minutes on my own show, I am in the wrong business. Calvin Pruitt, 81 years old, was reached by a journalist from the Associated Press 9 days after the clip went viral. He had seen it on his granddaughter's phone. He said, "I knew Ray would be all right. I always knew. That's why I kept writing." When told that Raymond kept every card in the velvet pouch with his medals, Calvin Pruitt went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Well, I guess I'll keep writing." Raymond's VA benefits file was reviewed within 72 hours of the taping, as promised. A dedicated case advocate was assigned. Back benefits for his TBI, benefits he had been entitled to since 2006, but had not received in full due to processing backlogs, were calculated at $44,800. A housing assistance supplement was added. Raymond received his first adjusted payment in November 2023. In December 2023, Steve Harvey formally established the Raymond Booker Veteran Fund through his foundation, providing emergency housing, TBI support, and benefits navigation assistance to post-9/11 and Vietnam-era veterans. In its first year, the fund served 3,100 veterans across 19 states, recovered $12.4 million in unpaid back benefits, and placed 870 unhoused veterans into stable housing. Sharice Booker joined the fund's Community Outreach Committee in February 2024. Imani Booker, age 8, was asked by her third-grade teacher in the spring of 2024 to write a paragraph about a person she admired. She wrote about her grandfather. The last sentence of her paragraph read, "He went far so we wouldn't have to, and he still came home." Raymond put it on the refrigerator. It is still there. On September 14, 2023, a 70-year-old man walked onto a game show stage in his one good suit with 4 medals on his lapel, and his 8-year-old granddaughter reached up and tugged his jacket and told him the truest thing anyone had said to him in 40 years. And the man who hosted the show heard it and could not speak, and walked off his own stage, and came back 14 minutes later with red eyes and an open heart, and finished what needed to be finished. The velvet pouch is still in Raymond's breast pocket. The Christmas card is still inside it. "You brought me home, Ray." I think about that every day. Some people carry their whole lives in a small, soft pouch, no bigger than a fist. 4 medals and 1 sentence from someone they saved. And they put it on every morning, and they stand up straight, and they show up. Not because the world made it easy, but because somewhere along the way they decided that showing up was the only answer left that mattered. If this story moved you, subscribe right now. We tell the stories that nearly didn't get told every week. Share this with someone who loves a veteran or is one. And leave a comment. What did someone you love carry quietly for years that you only found out later? Write it below. Honor it here.